When the French first arrived in Burkina Faso, they came carrying maps, notebooks, and smiles. They introduced themselves to our grandparents as explorers, men of science who wanted to study the earth, the wildlife, and the mysteries of the land. They came dressed not as conquerors, but as curious travelers. They said they came with no weapons, only with curiosity. And our ancestors, people of trust and open hearts, welcomed them. The Burkina people, like so many across Africa, saw strangers who admired the soil, the trees, and the rivers. They thought, here are men who love the beauty of our land just as we do. But while our people looked away, enchanted by this show of curiosity, the explorers were not writing poems about the trees. They were not sketching animals in their notebooks for the sake of beauty. They were mapping something else. Beneath the ground, glittering in the rivers, hidden under the soil, lay the true object of their fascination, gold. This is a story of trust betrayed, of wealth stolen, of silence enforced. But more importantly, it is a story of awakening a truth the people of Burkina Faso were never meant to know, but one that cannot remain buried forever. In the late 19th century, a wave of Europeans swept across Africa. The French, like others, arrived with polished speeches, claiming they came to discover, to understand, to learn. In Burkina Faso, then part of the wider Sahel, their first mission was to establish themselves as harmless. They spoke of wildlife, of agriculture, of studying the habits of the land. Imagine the scene: men in white linen shirts, carrying books and strange tools, greeted villages with smiles. They marveled at the baobab trees, asked questions about the rains, listened to stories of the ancestors. To people who valued hospitality, who believed guests were sacred, these strangers seemed respectful. But behind their curiosity lay calculation. For while they spoke of plants, they secretly studied the earth itself. Their eyes followed the shimmer of rivers, the gleam of dust in the water. They were not here for culture or friendship. They were here for what glittered beneath. Our grandparents could not imagine then that these so-called explorers had already been instructed by governments thousands of miles away. They were told to map the land, find the wealth, and prepare it for control. Gold. For centuries, Africa has been the beating heart of the world's gold supply. Long before Europeans arrived, empires like Ghana, Mali, and Songhai flourished because of their mastery of gold. The world's first great trade routes were paved with African gold dust carried across deserts. The French knew this history. They knew that beneath Burkina Faso's soil was a fortune waiting to be taken. Yet they also knew something else: the local people did not measure gold's value the same way. In villages, gold was seen as decoration, as spiritual adornment, not as the foundation of global wealth. This difference in perception became the colonizers' greatest weapon. To the Burkina farmer, gold was beautiful but not central to life. To the French officer, gold was power, banks, and empires. And so, while our people traded millet, cotton, and cattle, the French quietly built routes to smuggle gold out of the land. Caravans moved silently at night. Soldiers hidden in the shadows of explorers guarded shipments. And as tons of gold left the soil, the people remained unaware of the scale of the theft. But history tells us that silence never lasts forever. As years passed, whispers began. Villagers noticed strange movements at night. Some asked why foreigners, who claimed to study plants, seemed more interested in the earth. Others wondered why the soil, rich with hidden veins, was being dug in secret. And soon, questions arose. Brave men and women asked, "What is this metal you carry? Why do you value it so much? Why do you guard it with soldiers?" It was then that the story turned darker. Those who asked too many questions began to disappear. Some were taken away, never to return. Others were silenced through intimidation. Families waited for loved ones who never came back. This was not unique to Burkina Faso. Across Africa, colonizers used the same methods: silence, fear, disappearance. By removing those who resisted, they created an atmosphere of uncertainty. The message was clear: do not ask about the gold. Do not question what we do. Trust us, or pay the price. This fear lingered. Generations grew up hearing whispers, but never receiving answers. The truth was buried, not only under the soil but in the silence of memory. Perhaps the most powerful tool of colonization was not the gun, it was the control of knowledge. Schools were built, but they were not designed to teach Burkina children about their own land. Instead, they were taught about faraway rivers in Europe, foreign kings, foreign discoveries. A child could recite the rivers of France but knew little of the gold beneath their own village. This was no accident. To exploit a people, one must first disconnect them from their wealth. If a people do not know the value of what they own, they cannot protect it. And so, generation after generation, the story of Burkina Faso's gold was hidden behind textbooks that spoke only of Europe. Even today, traces of this strategy remain. Many Africans know the story of Napoleon but not the full story of their own great-grandparents who resisted colonial plunder. The result, a people rich in resources, but taught to believe they are poor. A nation with soil glittering in gold, but with history books that rarely mention it. To understand Burkina Faso's experience, we must place it in the wider African story. In Congo, it was rubber and ivory. In South Africa, diamonds. In Ghana, cocoa and gold. In Senegal, groundnuts. In Nigeria, all. Everywhere the pattern was the same: arrival under friendly disguise, discovery of wealth, gradual control, and eventual silence imposed on the population. The story of Burkina Faso was not unique, it was part of a larger system. And the wealth taken from Africa built monuments in Europe. Cathedrals, palaces, and railways were funded by resources stripped from African soil. Nations thousands of miles away grew rich, while the lands they extracted from were told to wait, to be patient, to accept their fate. This is why the story of Burkina Faso matters. It is not a small detail in history, it is a key chapter in the larger book of African resistance and awakening. But no system lasts forever. In the 20th century, as winds of independence swept across Africa, Burkina Faso began to wake. Leaders, thinkers, and revolutionaries began to speak openly about what had been stolen. They connected the dots. The poverty of the people was not due to laziness, but to systematic theft. The silence that had been enforced began to break. One name shines brightly in this awakening: Thomas Sankara. Though his leadership was cut short, Sankara's vision ignited a fire in the hearts of Burkina people. He said openly, "He who feeds you controls you." And in those words, he captured the essence of centuries of exploitation. Sankara urged the people to look inward, to value their land, their resources, their dignity. He reminded them that Burkina Faso was not poor, it had been made poor by a system of extraction and dependency. Though Sankara's life was tragically taken, his words remain alive. Today, they echo in the spirit of new generations who demand sovereignty, who seek to control their own gold, their own future. Why speak of this history now? Why reopen wounds of the past? Because history unspoken is history repeated. If we do not tell our children the truth, they may grow up believing the same illusions. They may look at the soil and not realize it holds gold. They may believe the false story that Africa is poor by nature, instead of rich by design. The truth empowers. It gives dignity. It reminds us that poverty is not destiny. It is the result of choices. Choices made by those who extracted and those who remained silent. Burkina Faso's story is not one of despair, but of resilience. Despite centuries of exploitation, the spirit of the people remains unbroken. Farmers still till the soil. Youth still dream of futures brighter than the past. Leaders still rise to challenge the system. The greatest fear of colonial powers was never the loss of gold. It was the rise of awareness. Because once a people know the truth, they can no longer be deceived. Today, a new generation of Burkina youth is reclaiming its story. Through education, through art, through political consciousness, they are piecing together the truths that were hidden. They are asking questions again, the same questions their ancestors once asked, but with louder voices and stronger unity. Technology has also changed the game. Where once stories were silenced, today they can be shared across the world in seconds. No longer can the truth be buried so easily. The question now is not whether the truth will emerge, but whether we will have the courage to act on it. Will we continue to let others define our land, or will we define it ourselves? The answer lies not in bitterness, but in clarity, not in hate, but in knowledge. For it is knowledge that breaks chains, and unity that keeps them broken. When the French first arrived in Burkina Faso, they came with smiles and promises. They came with books and notebooks, speaking of nature and wildlife. But behind their friendly words was a hunger for gold. They took while we trusted. They silenced while we hoped. And yet, despite all, the people of Burkina Faso remain strong, proud, resilient. This story is not about blame. It is not about hate. It is about truth. A truth that, once known, can never be taken away. The soil of Burkina Faso still holds gold. But more importantly, the people of Burkina Faso hold something greater. The unbreakable spirit of awareness. Let us carry this truth forward. Let us teach it to our children. Let us remind the world that the greatest wealth of any nation is not the gold beneath its soil, but the knowledge in the hearts of its people. Because the day a people know their worth, that is the day they can never again be stolen from. But together, they tell the tale of a nation on the rise. And as we conclude, remember, this is only the beginning. Time will decide how far Burkina Faso will go. But one thing is clear: Captain Ibrahim Traoré has already proven that with visionary leadership, no nation is doomed to remain behind. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps bring more stories of transformation, hope, and resilience to the world and tells about African lights.